Hey, we're starting a new unit and it is environmental chemistry. Now, this topic actually is kind of in a weird spot. It doesn't really directly relate to necessarily environmental chemistry, but it's like the chemistry of nutrition. So we're going to learn a little bit about nutrition today, which is an important lesson for life. We eat every day, and it's important what we put into our bodies. So let's go ahead and get into it and learn a little bit about nutrition. So first of all, in order to remain healthy, the human body, of course, needs nutrients. We get our nutrients from eating food. We cannot do photosynthesis. We don't like absorb stuff from the air in terms of like nutrients. So instead, we get it from eating food. And the process of eating food is called ingestion, of actually getting it into our body. You've probably heard like ingest as a term. So ingestion is the process of getting it into our body. Digestion is the process of actually that food breaking down into smaller soluble molecules that then can make it into our bloodstream. So digestion is making it into these really, really tiny molecules that then can absorb into our bloodstream and then get circulated to all of our cells. So it can have the energy and the building blocks and all the stuff that it needs in order to survive and thrive. So we're going to actually start talking a little bit about the molecules that are, broken down and then circulated throughout our bodies and to our cells, and what the role of those different molecules are. So cells use these nutrients for energy, for growth, for bodybuilding. And when we say bodybuilding in this lesson, we're not talking like big bodybuilder, but instead like building kind of muscles and tissues and so on, which is related. And also cell repair. These nutrients can be either organic or inorganic. This is going to be on a future slide, but organic means that it is in a compound that contains carbon. Okay, so it has carbon in it. Well, inorganic means that it does not have carbon. And carbon is incredible as an atom to bonding to other carbon atoms and also bonding to oxygen and nitrogen and hydrogen. So many things in our body are organic in that they are carbon containing molecules. Because basically it's like the perfect atom for building, for connecting to other carbons and building these long chains. Carbon's incredible. So I kind of think about it almost like if we were to talk about Lego, carbon is like the 2x4 brick, like the most common Lego brick that attaches so well to other Lego bricks. But all nutrients, whether organic or inorganic, are important to having good health. So we're going to get into some specifics here. Organic nutrients are nutrients that have carbon in them. Like I said, we're going to see it in a second. And they may be classified as one of the following four categories. And I'm sure you've heard these terms before. So the first one we're going to talk about is carbohydrates. The second one is proteins. The third is lipids or fats. And then the fourth is vitamins. So I'm not going to talk about these individually yet because we're going to get into all of them and talk about them more. So first of all, for carbohydrates, this is our main source of energy for metabolism. So essentially, carbohydrates, or carbs, right, as we call them, get broken down into simple sugars in our body through the process of digestion. And then those simple sugars are converted into energy in the mitochondria of our cells. So they end up changing through cellular respiration, the reaction you learned about in chemistry. The sugars end up changing into cellular energy in the form of ATP. And this isn't in the notes. I'm going a little bit further than I need to here, but I think it's good for us to tie it into previous knowledge. So there's more complex carbohydrates and then simpler carbohydrates. So for example, like potatoes, right? Very rich in carbohydrates, and that would be a complex carbohydrate. Same thing as grains or bread. Those are full of complex carbs. And then in your body, those get broken down over time slowly into simple carbohydrates or simple sugars that then are used by your cells. But they provide us with energy. If we don't have carbohydrates, we won't have enough energy. And anybody who's actually tried going on, let's say, a no-carb diet, not that dieting is a good idea, right? But if you go on, I say that. What I mean by that is it's better to make lifestyle changes that are permanent than to go on temporary crash diets. But that is a whole other conversation. But if you eat or don't eat carbs, you'll feel very lethargic and low in energy, especially if you were eating a lot before, and then you go off of them and you kind of almost go through a little bit of a crash for a few days. So some sources of carbs include rice, grains, pasta, potatoes, and fruits. And then also in there are things like sugars. Sugars are simple carbohydrates. This is taking the healthy road and talking about foods that are rich in complex carbohydrates. The difference is complex carbohydrates turn into sugars over time, so they don't cause a blood sugar spike, while complex or simple carbohydrates, simple sugars, cause an immediate blood sugar spike, and they're much less healthy for you, and also much more typically are turned into fat storage in your body. So that's carbohydrates. It's your primary energy source, and important to know what foods are rich in carbs. Proteins are basically involved in helping chemical reactions, in repairing and building tissues. It's like the building blocks, okay, of our bodies. So proteins are needed if we are going through, no matter what, we need protein in our diet in order for our body to work properly. But people who are really interested in building muscle, for example, are very focused on how much protein they have. So for example, they might make sure that they eat as many grams of protein as body weight, or even twice as much. Now, if you eat too much protein, it actually is like bad for your kidneys and stuff. But yeah, it is very important in building tissue. And that's why it says they're used in bodybuilding. Again, the idea of building parts of your body. Not talking about bodybuilding the sport, but building parts of your body. This comes from meats, eggs, dairy products, legumes, nuts. All of these things are rich in protein. Now, these aren't pure protein. I'm saying rich in protein, which means a high percentage of it is protein. If you actually take a look at, for example, a chicken breast, and you look at the amount of that's protein, I think it's like 30% protein or something. So there's still carbs in there and so on, even in like meats, yes, but it's rich in protein compared to other foods. So all of these have a lot of protein. Now, proteins in your body get broken down into what's called amino acids, and amino acids are the building block of proteins. And those amino acids then are used in order to make new proteins in your body. So proteins we eat are broken down into these simple building blocks called amino acids, and then those amino acids are used to actually build proteins that we need. Now, there are things called essential amino acids, and these are amino acids that we must get from our food that we cannot build ourselves in our body. So when we talk about essential amino acids, the term essential in nutrition means that we have to ingest them in some form in order to actually have them in our bodies in order to remain healthy. So that's proteins. Think about building tissue, building blocks for proteins. Lipids and fats is a secondary energy source. They're also required in things like cell membranes and stuff. They're important to our body. We must have fats. And they come from things like vegetable oils, nut oils, dairy products. You're going to find it in meats. For example, salmon is full of really healthy oils and fats. And I will say this, that there's kind of like this idea of, oh, it's low fat and no fat, and that fat is bad. And actually, although fat of certain kinds is bad for your heart and cardiovascular health, fats for the most part are something that are not necessarily bad for us if they're healthy fats, and they actually don't necessarily add to fat on our bodies. This is a big misconception. The main thing that actually adds to fat in our bodies is spiking our blood sugar, eating a lot of simple, refined carbohydrates. That's the primary culprit for that kind of gain. So lipids and fats are important for us to have. Things like olive oil is a really healthy fat. Avocados are full of healthy fats. All of these are good sources. So let's talk a little bit about good fats versus bad fats. And maybe you've heard about bad fats in terms of trans, saturated fats. These fats are fats that are bad for our heart health. So they can start clogging up arteries and causing issues because our body cannot break them down very easily. So when we talk about saturated fats and trans fats, those are fats that our body can't break down as easily. They might be delicious, but we can't break them down as easily. So as a result, they can actually start clogging up our arteries and causing issues for us and raising bad cholesterol. Well, good fats are good for our body. They are used in our body. They're broken down into glycerols and fatty acids, okay, building blocks that we use in order to build things like cell membranes and other stuff that our body needs to do, right? It keeps our body healthy. So it's important to have good fats. You should not avoid fats entirely. Some fats are very, very good for us and we need to have them. But we should stay away from bad fats for proper cardiovascular health. When the body needs energy, it first turns to carbohydrates. Okay, so whether that's simple or complex carbohydrates, it turns to carbohydrates first. And that's what gets used up for energy to make ATP in our cells in order for our cells to do stuff. If there's not enough carbohydrates available, then our body can start breaking down lipids or fats. And that's the secondary energy source. So that's why like burning fat in your body, right? That's when we don't have enough carbohydrates available for the energy, then it starts going to our fat stores and using that for energy instead. And then finally, if all of that is used up, then it's going to start eating proteins. So for example, when people start losing large amounts of muscle mass, right, from a bad diet, that's what's happening is your body is now going to proteins and actually eating itself, essentially, is kind of what we say. You're eating your own tissue in order to get the energy that cells need in order to survive. So carbohydrates, primary energy source, then fats, and then finally proteins as your final energy source. The last organic nutrient that we talked about is vitamins. And vitamins, there are 13 essential vitamins that your body needs. Again, the term essential means that we need to ingest it in order for us to have those vitamins. We cannot make them in our own bodies. So the human body cannot produce essential vitamins itself. It must get them from food or supplements. If you eat healthy food, if you eat a lot of whole foods, vegetables, fruits, and so on, you probably are getting all of the vitamins that you need naturally. You don't need to take extra vitamins. But you can, of course, take multivitamins or extra vitamins in order to have proper health. For example, vitamin D, especially important these days when there's not a ton of sunlight and you're spending a lot of the sunlight time inside. Vitamin D is a great supplement to take because it plays a huge role in things like your immune system and even stuff like your mood and so on. I believe it plays a bit of a role in mental health. So vitamin D is something that, for example, you might be deficient in because it requires sunlight in order for our body to be able to make it. So is that an essential vitamin? No, it's not essential because our body can actually make it ourselves. Something like B12, vitamin B12, that is an essential vitamin. We cannot make B12 ourselves, but vitamin B12 instead comes from typically meats, for example. Vitamins help enzymes, catalysts to function in the body. So you've learned about catalysts back in reaction rates. In chemistry, catalysts are things that speed up chemical reactions. In your body, you have tons of chemical reactions happening all the time. So vitamins are needed in order for those chemical reactions to occur. Different vitamins will help different chemical reactions that are important to the healthy functioning of your body. So I'm saying catalysts, but in biology, in living things, catalysts are instead called enzymes. So enzymes are the proper term. Minerals. Minerals are also needed from us. So what's the difference between a vitamin and a mineral? Well, a vitamin is organic. It contains carbon. A mineral is different elements. Okay, it's not a carbon-containing compound. It can just be straight up elements. So elements our body needs to develop and function properly. We put minerals into two different categories: macro minerals, and that is stuff we have to consume more than 100 milligrams or more each day. Just to make that clear what that means, 100 milligrams is 0.100 grams. So milli, little m, means thousandth, essentially. Okay, so 100 thousandths of a gram, so 0.100 grams. So macro minerals, we need more than that each day in order to remain healthy. Well, trace elements, we can have less than that and we're still healthy. So recommended dose for trace elements are less than macro minerals. And again, the line is 100 milligrams or 0.100 grams. These are some examples not of necessarily trace elements, but just minerals that we need to consume in order to stay healthy. So calcium, iodine, zinc, iron, etc. And then beside it are pictures of different things that that we need or can consume in order to get those foods. So zinc, for example, is something that we find in a pretty high concentration in certain nuts. For example, Brazil nuts are very high in zinc, and zinc is required for a lot of things. For example, it can really help with proper sleep. So yeah, plays some roles in the immune system. For guys, it actually plays a role in testosterone production. There's lots of different things that play into that. Iron, you know a little bit about that, that iron is actually involved in hemoglobin in our blood. Red blood cells have this molecule called hemoglobin, which binds to oxygen. If we don't have enough iron, then we actually won't be able to carry as much oxygen in our blood because we can't produce as much hemoglobin. So here's an example. What elements do you need to make your bones strong? I'm assuming everyone knows this, but we'll put it in as an Edpuzzle question. And just as a hint, there's 300 milligrams of this element per cup of milk. And 300 milligrams is 0.300 grams. So the answer, calcium. So would this be a macro mineral or a trace element based on what you know? It would be a macro mineral. We need a fair amount of calcium each day in order for us to stay healthy and our bodies to function properly, to build strong bones and strong teeth, etc. Here's a neat video. It's older in style, but it's got some cool visuals. So check this out. Some other kind of information. So this is some information about different minerals and what it does. So for example, calcium, crucial in nerve conduction, muscle contraction, blood clotting, proper function of cell membranes, forms bones and teeth. That's a classic thing we know calcium for, right? Phosphorus promotes proper bone formation, regulates metabolism, forms compounds that store and release energy. The molecule I talked about before, ATP, cellular energy, is adenosine triphosphate. So phosphate it contains phosphorus. It's an ion that's PO4 with a 3 negative charge. So it contains phosphorus. So we need phosphorus for energy. Magnesium, component of bones and teeth, essential to enzyme function, helps regulate nerve activity. Sodium helps regulate nerve impulses in nerves and muscles. So when we talk about like electrolytes, for example, we could have sodium and potassium in there. So potassium also helps regulate nerve signals, muscle activity involved in protein formation, required to regulate the acid and base balance in our body so it doesn't go out of whack. So those are a few examples of different minerals that we need and the function they play in our body. If you want to see more of this, I mean, you can certainly look it up, but actually the next video contains more information about different minerals, so you can check this out as well. Last thing I want to show you, I guess there's actually a few things. Sorry, there's this and fertilizer. If you take a look at food, you will find nutritional information. And this gives you information about what it contains. Now, I just want to break this down a little bit so you can understand a little bit more about what you're eating. Future, we may do some kind of assignment where you take a look at the food you eat and kind of do something around it. But I'm just going to move this up a tad. First of all, the first thing you should notice on any nutritional label that a lot of people don't pay attention to is the serving size. This can be somewhat misleading because sometimes serving sizes vary from product to product, what they consider to be a serving. And of course, if they use a really small serving, like 30 grams is actually not very much, then they can put a lower calorie count and a lower sugar count because there's less in the sample. So as a result, they can be a little bit misleading with the information it contains. So always interesting to take a look when you're comparing two products at the serving size, because that plays quite a role. And it's actually almost better to consider the percentage of the food that contains different macronutrients like carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. It's almost more important to consider that as a percentage of the serving size than actually just the amount, the flat amount. So for example, if I take a look at Fruit Loops, pretty low in fat, right? 0.72 grams. So if I take a look at 30 grams compared to 0.72, I mean, this is what, 3%, a little bit less, 2.5% or so fat. So very little fats in there, of which bad fats, saturated fats and trans fats, those are bad fats. I don't have a ton. Okay, so not bad for fats. Sodium, it's got some sodium in there, a little bit of the salt, right? So when we track sodium, that's typically from sodium chloride, salt. It has a little bit of potassium in there, so are minerals. And then we have some carbohydrates. And in fact, we have a lot of carbohydrates. 26.7 grams of this is carbs. So that means that essentially about 90% of this is carbohydrates, right? Because 10% would be 3 grams. So about 90% of Fruit Loops is just straight up carbs. Now of those carbs, 15.9 grams are simple carbohydrates, sugars. And the remainder, the other 11 grams, would be complex carbohydrates that get broken down in your body over time and provide you with sustained energy. They would be better carbs. But 15.9 grams of sugars is simple carbs that spike your blood sugar and aren't typically very healthy for you. It's good in moderation, but not good to have a lot of. And then finally, we have 1.2 grams of protein. So this is not a good source of protein. That would be less than 5%. That would be like 4% of this. Exactly 4% actually. So very low for a source of protein. Then of course we have a few vitamins in here to make it sound healthy. Look, we have some vitamins and part of our recommended amount of vitamins. So nutritional information, really interesting. When you look at things like protein, for example, if it worked out to be about 20% of the serving size, I would say it's a pretty good source of protein. So if you had 6 grams or more of protein, I would say Fruit Loops, good source of protein. Less, yeah. All right, plants. Talking about nutrition of plants because we get our nutrients directly or indirectly from plants. So it's important to understand a little bit about plant nutrition. Plants can have insane mineral concentrations inside of them, up to 10,000 times higher than the soil they are in. They actually bring in minerals into their roots through a process called active transport, which you're going to learn about in Science 10, but it's using cellular energy to get stuff inside against the concentration gradient. So going from where there's less to where there's more, different from diffusion and osmosis. But plants are able to get minerals inside of their roots. They use their root hairs, which show up really nicely in this picture, to get tons of surface area so they can get more minerals and bring it into the plant. After the minerals make it into the plant, they go throughout the plant in order to do different things in the plant where it's needed, right? So building organic nutrients such as vitamins, proteins, lipids, that's what the minerals are used for inside of the plant, but they come in through the roots. Fertilizers are often used in order to make sure that there's enough minerals in the soil in order for the plant to grow properly. There are always 3 numbers on fertilizer, and these numbers are always in the same exact order. So it's nitrogen first, then phosphorus, and then potassium. I actually remember this by saying to myself NPK. I don't know if that helps. It doesn't actually stand for anything. I don't know. We could come up with something. No plants know what's in fertilizer. I don't know. Anyways, but NPK is the order of the numbers on fertilizer. So the numbers that you normally see are percentages of how much of the mass of that fertilizer actually contains that element. So nitrogen is really important for leaf growth and good green color in plants. Phosphorus is great for the root system and good for making seeds, fruits, and flowers. And then finally, potassium is for strong stems and growing fast and fighting disease and kind of just overall wellness. People who are really serious about their plants will actually test their soil to see where it's at for different nutrients so they can pick the appropriate fertilizer. So here's just another picture to show this. Nitrogen, think about the up. It helps plants grow up and be green and so on. Phosphorus reaches down, so up, down, all around, NPK. And potassium promotes all around well-being. So up, down, all around. And then here's finally on the last one, just kind of showing the fertilizer bag and 21-3-20. And this is the different percentages. So 21% in a 50-pound bag contains nitrogen. Phosphorus is 3% in a 50-pound bag if this is a 50-pound bag of fertilizer, and the potassium would be 20% in this bag. So about 10 pounds of potassium. So yeah, that's what fertilizer means, which is just good to know later on in life when you really get into trying to make your yard as beautiful as possible. All right, well, that's it for nutrition. You have a good rest of your day.